I'm pleased to be here today with Father Festo Mkenda, Academic Director of the Jesuit Worldwide Archives in Rome, and with Bisrat Aklilu, alumnus of Tafari Makonnen School and President of the Tafari Makonnen School Alumni Association. We will be discussing Father Festo's forthcoming book, A Splash of Diamond. Now, of course, we're very interested in hearing about A Splash of Diamond, Father Festo. But before we begin to discuss the book, why don't you tell our viewers a bit about your background?
Well, I'm very happy to do that, and thank you for the invitation to do so. My story is simple. I'm a Tanzanian. I was born in Tanzania, in the northern part of Tanzania around Mount Kilimanjaro. So the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro is, that's where my home is. Apart from that, I'm a Jesuit priest. I joined the Jesuits some years back. I was trained in philosophy and theology in preparation for ordination to ministry. And so I also serve as a priest. And as a Jesuit, currently here in Rome, as you said at the introduction, serving as the academic director of the Worldwide Archives of the Society of Jesus, which are based here in Rome. Besides that, I am a historian. I'm a trained historian. I studied African history at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where I did a master's in African history. And from there, I went to Oxford and completed a DPhil, again in political history, specializing on African political history. And after my graduation, I've done a number of things. I've continued researching, mainly in the history of the Jesuits in Africa. I've published a few things in that area. I've also been a teacher. I've taught history of Christianity in Africa, mainly at Hekima College in Nairobi. And more recently, before I moved to Rome, I also taught African history at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. So that's me. That's Festo Mkenda.
Well, thank you, Father Festo. And now, Bisrat has a question for you, but before you ask it, Bisrat, would you tell us just a bit about the Tafari Makonnen School Alumni Association, which you've actually headed for, I think, a number of years? Give us a brief description, if you would.
Thank you, Doug. Again, pleasure to see you again, Father Festo. As Doug said, I am a Tafari Makonnen School alumnus. I have been the president of the Alumni Association, which initially was known as Tafari Makonnen Alumni Association in North America, because basically it was an association for those of us in the diaspora. There was another one, a sister organization in Ethiopia. But a great pleasure, as of about 2 weeks ago, the two organizations have united, and now we have renamed it as the Tafari Makonnen Alumni Association, uniting the alumni worldwide. And so it's really a great pleasure. And in addition, what a fortunate coincidence. Yesterday, April 27th, was the 97th anniversary of the establishment of Tafari Makonnen School. It was established April 27, 1925. So here we are discussing what the Jesuits have played a major role in the establishment of this school, as well as also the college, on this occasion through your book. So really a great pleasure.
So, do you have a question for our distinguished author?
Yes, very much so. Father Festo, what led you to this decision to write A Splash of Diamond? And what is the backstory? And by the way, how did you come up with this intriguing title?
These are really very interesting questions, and more so now. I feel easy to respond to them now, probably more than before, because recently I've been writing my preface to the book, telling the story of how all this came about. So exactly trying to speak to the reader about this very question that you are asking me today. And as I reflected on that, I recall that in 2019, I was moving from my former job as director of the Jesuit Historical Institute in Africa, which is based in Nairobi, and I was transitioning to the US, where I eventually taught at Xavier University. And within that window of time, I had some free time that I needed to figure out what to do with it. The story of the Jesuits in Ethiopia is well known to me. But at that time, I recall that in a year's time, in 2020, it would be 75 years since the Canadian Jesuits actually moved to Ethiopia after they had been invited by Emperor Haile Selassie to come and help the Emperor and Ethiopia in some educational projects, including the running of Tafari Makonnen School. And it occurred to me that it would be a good time for that story to be written so that it's well known to people. As a Jesuit myself from East Africa, I found the experience of the Canadian Jesuits in Ethiopia extremely inspiring for a number of reasons. One, I think it's a very clear example of people who at that time at least had some significant differences, I thought, but who were willing to put their differences aside and to come together and do something great. And I will explain that a little bit more. So when the emperor invited the Jesuits to Ethiopia, he put upon them very strict conditions. They could not minister as religious or priests. They could not do any religious ministry. They could not wear any religious dress. They could not preach, or they could not even be called father. So usually these are very strict conditions. But the Jesuits were actually ready. They said, yeah, we can do all that if you give us an opportunity to contribute to Ethiopia. And so they came with that generosity, completely willing to forget about their religious, at least the external religious expressions, and really do what the emperor invited them to do, which was to run Tafari Makonnen School and eventually help him in founding what became the University College of Addis Ababa. So I personally thought that story is good, inspiring, and needed to be told. And so that's one of the reasons that made me think about that, the anniversary, the importance of that story itself. And I felt that, yeah, it would be a good way of celebrating the Jesuits who went there. It would be a good way also of acknowledging the generosity and the openness of the people of Ethiopia who welcomed the Canadians to come and work in Ethiopia. So these are really the things that made me think about this book at this particular time in history. On the title, two things. It's really a combination of two things. So when I started researching, reading about Tafari Makonnen, of course, the figure of Emperor Haile Selassie was large. And I came across this line that has stayed with me, and it will be at the very beginning of the book, the splash, A Splash of Diamond. And the emperor says, I quote, "Many books have been written to the effect that knowledge is a treasure that must be grasped and which no one can confiscate. It is a diamond without price, which prevents the breaking of heaven's decrees and preserves one from the path of destruction. In this statement, you can see how much value the emperor put to education. And so I picked the word diamond from that. But then there's a coincidence that I'm writing this book also to commemorate 75 years, which is usually referred to as a diamond jubilee. So this combination of the two made me come up with this diamond, and it's a splash. It comes in a splash. And so, yeah, I came up with the title.
Very fitting title, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Father Festo, we know why you undertook authorship of A Splash of Diamond. Tell us now a bit more about the content that's covered in the book and the structure of the book, if you would.
Very happy to do that. And again, now that I have a complete manuscript before me, this is very easy to do. Now, books are, of course, texts. But probably right at the beginning, let me say that once I started this project, I underwent change. I rethought my idea of this book. And initially, I thought of a small book of a few pages of a text that someone would read through very quickly. And it is still a small book, but with a difference. It has been enriched, it has been embellished by many photographs and paintings. I've come to appreciate that every time I look at Ethiopian manuscripts, they are not just texts. They have a lot of paintings, drawings, pictures. And I think that's something very uniquely Ethiopian, that a story is not just told by text, it's also told visually by visual illustrations. And so I went out to look for photos that actually tell exactly the same story. And so in this book, we have two things. We have a text, fairly short, but we also have a series of pictures so that if someone only looked through the pictures, he will also, or she will also understand the same story. And so it's a combination of pictures and text. My text is basically divided into three parts, I would say. So once I set out to focus on the Canadian Jesuits, one thing became very clear, that actually this is more than a Canadian Jesuit story. It's genuinely an Ethiopian story. And so I needed to put the Canadian Jesuits' experience in Ethiopia within a larger context. So my book can easily be divided into three parts. The first part, with 2 chapters, introduces us to the Jesuit story in Ethiopia. The first part talks about Jesuit history in Ethiopia before the Canadians. Jesuits have involved themselves with Ethiopia from the 16th century. I dare say that at the very beginning of the Jesuit order, St. Ignatius' interest in Ethiopia and for Ethiopia cannot be compared with any other place. He dedicated so much time to plan the missions for Ethiopia. So Jesuits have been involved in Ethiopia from the 16th century up to the mid-17th century. And I thought telling that story, even in a very short first chapter, was important, because then it helps the reader understand why Emperor Haile Selassie Invited the Jesuits, yes, because he knew that they were good at running education projects, but invited them under very strict conditions. And to understand why the emperor behaved that way, we need to understand the story from the 16th and the 17th century. So that was important. The second chapter, still in terms of introducing the story, it tells us the educational situation within Ethiopia before the emperor decided to invite the Jesuits. And this is the situation where the Italian invasion was over, the Italian had left the country, and Ethiopia needed to rebuild itself. Tafari Makonnen School was one of the institutions that were really damaged under the Italian occupation. And so Ethiopia wanted the school to be rebuilt, but not only the school, he wanted to see the entire education system in Ethiopia revamped. And he genuinely thought that the Jesuits were going to help him in that. And that's how he decided to welcome them. So the second chapter, again, very briefly, tells that story, what was happening before the Canadians came in. And then, so we can treat those two chapters as quick introductions. Really, the center of the book are the three chapters in the middle. The third chapter is entirely dedicated to Tafari Makonnen School. When the Canadians went to Ethiopia, they were entrusted with this school. They were to transform it to become the example for other schools in Ethiopia. And they did exactly that, of course, collaborating with so many other people from elsewhere and some Ethiopians as well. So the third chapter tells that story, leading to the fourth chapter, which is the story of the founding of the University College of Addis Ababa. Now, for me, this is not a different story from Tafari Makonnen. It's genuinely a progression of what had started at Tafari Makonnen. And Tafari Makonnen, therefore, continues to be very important, even in that fourth chapter, which leads to the fifth chapter. And what it is a story of both Tafari Makonnen and the University College of Addis Ababa in the 60s. There's a lot of change within Ethiopia. We are almost moving towards the moment where the emperor will be toppled. So a lot of political change within Ethiopia around towards the end of the 60s and the early 70s. And that too had an impact on what the school was going through and what the university college was going through. So in the fifth chapter, I tell that story for the two institutions at the same time. And finally, the last chapter, the sixth chapter, is really, I would wish to say, I would like to see it as a story of success in a way that things changed in Ethiopia. Canadians are no longer in Ethiopia, but their legacy is still there in so many different ways. So in my last chapter, I tell the story of what happens to Jesuits and within Ethiopia after that period of Canadians first leave the two institutions and eventually leave Ethiopia. The last one just left very recently. But then what happened after that? I eventually included stories of 6 Ethiopian-born Jesuits that I've interviewed and have allowed me to use some of their stories in the text. And I conclude the book telling what Jesuits are still doing in Ethiopia today, telling stories of Ethiopian-born Jesuits, and telling of other projects of collaboration within Ethiopia as now part of the larger province of Eastern Africa. So that's the content, but I would want to say that the book will be introduced by a foreword by the Jesuit Provincial Superior of the province of Eastern Africa, and it will be ended by an afterword from none other than Doug Eadie, who we are conversing with today. Yeah. So in general, that's the content of the book.
So, Bisrat?
Well, yes, thank you very much, Father Festo. You've told us quite a bit already about the book, but obviously, given my interest in Tafari Makonnen, let me go back and still ask you, how large does Tafari Makonnen School loom in a splash of diamond? And also, what are your impressions of TMS under the leadership of the Jesuits?
Thank you very much. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to elaborate more on what I said earlier. And as I said, I've already written my preface to the book. And if you don't mind, I will read a line or two from the preface, which is still a draft. And this is what I said. Once I started putting a structure around my thoughts, the project acquired a life of its own, which in turn determined the pace and the shape of the final product. While Canadian Jesuits remained major characters in what was unfolding, the narrative hinged on the person of Haile Selassie and the Tafari Makonnen School that the Jesuits ran for him in Addis Ababa, making it a particularly Ethiopian story. So, as I said, I started this as an idea of writing something about the Canadian Jesuits. It largely ended up being really a story about Haile Selassie and Tafari Makonnen School. If you are asking me of what is the core, what's the heart of your book, I would say three things: Canadian Jesuits, Haile Selassie, and Tafari Makonnen. And together they make a unit. As I said, the earlier chapters prepare us for that story, and the other chapters are actually a progression of that story. And I think really Tafari Makonnen should probably claim it's right to brag that the University of Addis Ababa was nurtured at Tafari Makonnen School. I think that can be said without any apology. And so Tafari Makonnen is very important in that story. About Jesuits, as I said, again at the beginning, for me, it is important that men and women can have differences, but reach a point where they say that there's a greater good to be served. And I am hugely appreciative of the contribution of the Jesuits, even under the strict conditions that the emperor imposed on them. They could abandon their religious clothing. They could stop practicing any religious public ministry. They could be called misters or messieurs in French, and they had no problem with that. And for me, it's an example of what people can do. We can put differences aside and do great things together. And I hope this story has significance well beyond Ethiopia. And I hope from this story also, we can challenge the Jesuits of the province of Eastern Africa, especially on what they can still do in Ethiopia, but equally challenge Ethiopian society in terms of what they could do more with the Jesuits, I think. And I hope this story will have at least that bit of an impact. a good example from the past that we can learn from. And I believe this has an impact well beyond Ethiopia. And so that's my impression of the Canadian Jesuits. And probably to finish this line, I would emphasize that at some point, when it was very difficult for the Jesuits to find qualified teachers from within Ethiopia, the emperor allowed them to look for another religious group that might be willing to work with them at Tafari Makonnen. They tried and failed. No religious group was willing to come and work on those strict conditions. So again, I think that goes to my admiration of the Canadian Jesuits in Ethiopia.
If I may just say, I mean, obviously we're delighted and eagerly looking forward to reading this book. And another person that would be very, very happy is one of the two remaining Jesuits in Canada, Father Ronald Turen. He's 98. I had told him that your book is about to come. And he said, well, I may be a bit old to sit down, but I would like to read it, I would like to see it, He's so happy that this story is being told, So thank you very much, Father Festo.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Well, Father Festo, we have a closing question for you. I, like Bisrat, keenly anticipate reading A Splash of Diamond. Tell us who's publishing the book and how it can be obtained.
Thank you. Like all the other things about this book, there has been some developments since I started working on it. And one happy development is that eventually the Jesuit province of Eastern Africa decided to support this project as part of their celebrations of this special year, which is a special year for Jesuits. We are marking 500 years since the conversion of St. Ignatius, which was somewhat dramatic. He had an accident, and out of that, he converted himself. He was converted and eventually became the founder of the Jesuits. And since last year and through to this year, we are marking 500 years since that conversion. And as part of the celebrations, the province of Eastern Africa offered to support this project, which was a kind offer from their part. But it will be published by the Jesuit Historical Institute. We are just about to finalize an agreement with them. They will publish the book, and they will also circulate the book. They will sell the book. They will make sure that people who want to buy the book can buy it from them, and it will be available to order online. In what form, I don't have the details yet, but it will be possible to order this book online, and the Jesuit Historical Institute in Africa, which is based in Nairobi, Kenya, will handle the publication together with the circulation of the book. And once I have the details about how to order this, we will make them available.
Great. Well, I, along with Bisrat, am really looking forward to reading the book and expect to before midsummer. That sounds reasonable, I would think.
That's my hope. That's my hope.
Well, Father Festo Mkenda, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about your forthcoming book. I know your schedule is tremendously demanding, and so we appreciate it. I want to thank you, Bisrat, for joining the discussion, representing the worldwide Tafari Makonnen School Alumni Association. And I want to wish both of you a very pleasant day and evening.
Well, also
Take care.
Let me again say complimenti, Father Festo, and very, very much looking forward. And thank you very much, Doug, for organizing this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Take care.